So, as someone who teaches a wide variety of science classes for a wide variety of age students, one of the things that I find often in the standards, I try to teach the standards, is evolution. So this is something that people struggle with teaching, I think, for obvious reasons. And so I'm always looking for some way to present this information, which actually the information itself is not that controversial, I find. And so I thought, well, wouldn't it be fun to invent a game, some sort of board game that kids could play and sort of be introduced to how adaptations get developed in species and are passed on to the next generations, you know? And so we get this nuclear arms race between species, which brought us into all the species diversity that we see today. And then I thought, well, that would take a long time, and I bet there's something out there already that sort of does this. And so I went online and I found this game, and it's called Evolution. And I wouldn't have been able to design something like this in the time amount that I had. And so I thought it would be a fun thing to do a lesson plan around this board game to introduce students, starting with, so this can be done with 8th grade students. Evolution's in the standards for 8th grade science. It can be done obviously with biology students and earth science standards as well. And so for a title, I went with Darwin's actual definition of evolution, which is pretty simple, just descent with modification. We are like our parents, but we are not our parents, right? And so these are the standards that I try to cover in this lesson. I'm not gonna bore you with going through all of these, but as you can see, that applies to 8th grade biology here and some earth and environmental science standards here. So again, I say, don't be afraid to teach this stuff. They need to know this stuff. They need to know what's being said in the world and things like that. And so going on the 5E lesson plan design here, to engage some attention, I'm gonna ask my students some discussion questions, right? And to spark a little bit of a conversation, like what's an adaptation, right? And I'm gonna expect them to tell me that it's a beneficial trait. And we'll talk about comparing and contrasting natural selection and artificial selection. And I want them to know the relationship between traits and genes and alleles. And I am gonna expect them to tell me that the smallest unit of evolution is a population, right? It's not a species. Species do not evolve, they acclimate. Individuals evolve, individuals acclimate, they do not evolve, sorry. And so after a little bit of discussion, I really like to show this video, which is put out by Harvard University, and it actually allows us to see evolution in real time. This occurs over the course of 11 days, but the video is 2 minutes long. So I'll go ahead and start it, and I'll talk about it a little bit as I go. I don't know if you need to see this whole video. Yeah, and so essentially what they've done here is they've made a big petri dish, all right? And this is how antibiotic resistance develops in bacteria, right? Which is some evolution that we've all participated in and seen over the course of our own lifetimes. So what happens here is we're going to introduce, this is basically a big petri dish, introduce some bacteria on this region and that region on the other end, and we'll put some, so notice it was in grids here, we'll put some level of antibiotic right here, all right? And then this is going to be 10 times that in this quadrant, then 100 times, and then by the time we get to the middle, it will be 1,000 times the concentration of the antibiotic that was introduced to this bacteria, which is just E. coli, here and here. All right, so over 11 days, some time-lapse photos here. And what we see, evolution has a lot of definitions, right? Descent with modification. Change over time is a great definition for like elementary and high school kids. But also, like, the technical definition is a change in allele frequencies within a population over time. And so what that means is alleles are things that code for a trait, right? They're characters. So, you know, each one of these little guys within this population develops some, you know, shows up some allele that, hey, guess what? It is now resistant to this bacteria, and it can pass on its traits to its progeny, right? And so this is how these things spread, and traits and adaptations spread over time. Obviously, bacteria evolving to resist antibiotics is not an adaptation from our perspective, but for the bacteria of the E. coli, of course it is. And so I would migrate then into a little four corners activity where I'm gonna like put these terms on the room, and we're gonna migrate to some term that you think best identifies with what we just watched on the video. And I would argue that what we saw here is microevolution, because we did not influence the whole population of, the whole E. coli species across the world, but we did see some changes within a population. So at this point, I feel like students are ready to play the game. So if you want to do this game, I encourage you to do it. It's about $50 on Amazon. And then it's two to six players. They need to migrate into groups, and I would probably spend a class day on this game. And it actually allows them to get populations, get species, and select certain traits or adaptations and see how those traits play out in a changing world. There's another version of this game that just has evolution. This one is evolution climate, so the climate's going to change, and so organisms that tend to have the widest diversity of alleles to adapt to changing climates and conditions are going to tend to be more successful than others. So that would be the meat and potatoes of this lesson. To explain, there's some terminology I want people to know, and so I would have them include these terms and possibly others in their interactive notebooks. I'm not going to give them the definitions. I'm going to expect them to just find those on their own, and then they can come to me and ask me if it fits. If they want to explore this further on their own, there's a little link to a KWL chart here that can kind of give them an opportunity to explore any questions they might have further on their own. And also if they have, ideological issues with this, this is a chance to express that, right? And then we could talk about these things too. And then to evaluate this, it was to be evaluated through essay questions, actually. I'm gonna have them do some writing. And I have some essay questions that I've found here that sort of cover this topic, and I'm going to ask them there are 7 here. I'll ask them to select 3 and write about them and include like 5 of the vocabs that terms that we discussed earlier, and supply us with some correct information. So that would be my expectation here. So thank you.